What's up, No Nation? Welcome to another episode of Plant the Spear podcast. We're here to talk about the new CFP format that has been pretty much released now. I know there's still some details in the workings, still some things they got to agree to, still being run by the crooked committee. So,
You know
it
how
is
they are.
right. It is what it is, but it's interesting. And there's been some changes that have been made, some changes that were expected to be made for quite a long time since the original 6+6 format was announced. But given the crazy landscape of college football and the way things are going right now, they kind of had to revisit things because the poor old decimated Pac-12, currently as the Pac-2, they just kind of they had to make some adjustments. And to
Yeah.
be honest, I think they made the right move in this because when you just look at how things played out, it would have been crazy to give them that automatic qualifier bid.
Right.
So we're going to get into it today. We're going to talk about what the format is, some things that we think are going to play out long term with these changes, and then how that affects Florida State, what it means for the Noles. So just let's get up to speed on this first, Michael. Let's just jump into this and kind of lay out the format here. So
Okay.
stepping back, we originally know you had 6+6. You had your
That's right.
Power Five. Now, to be fair, the committee, the CFP, whatever you want to call them, they don't use the word Power
No.
Five or Group of Five because it's not a
Correct.
technical name. So it was originally 6+6, 5 Power 5 champions, which was assumed, and a
Yeah.
G5 champion, and then 6 at-large bids. Now it is going to be 5 conference champions, no matter the level, based on your ranking, and 7 at-large teams. So
Correct.
you're going to still have that opportunity to win your conference and get that automatic qualifier bid. In a
Correct.
sense, if the only thing that really changed is the fact that it's now 5 conference
That's right.
champion bids, because the Pac-12, what they've done is the 2 remaining schools have basically said, we agree it's not fair for us, one of 2 schools only, to get
Right.
in there. I mean, they're playing a modified Mountain West
Yeah.
schedule this year.
Right.
So it's just not going to be a fair footing to put one of them in. So now you have 5 conference champion bids and 7 at-large bids. And I think this is going to be good. I think you have an opportunity to get some more teams in here. You still have that little bit of Cinderella story if you want
Yeah.
by getting a G5 team in there. And so let's just we'll do some overall thoughts and then we'll get into it. So, the format and everything there. So I'll let you share some overall thoughts on this. And do you like it? Do you think it's necessary? And how do you think it's going to play out? And then we'll kind of go over the whole thing, get in a little bit in depth here.
Well, I mean, thanks for having me, Jesse. This was inevitable. I mean, think about it. When they introduced the 4-team playoff, the first iteration of this back in 2014, you knew that we were going to end up here. And let's just go ahead and be honest about this right now. We will eventually get to 16 teams.
Yep.
I don't see there any other way that there won't be 16-team playoff. And I think that's probably where it will stop. But I know we're going to get to the 16 teams. This format was inevitable. It was going to happen. It needed to happen. It was not enough to just have 4 teams competing for a national championship, because sometimes in some of those years, those weren't the 4 best teams. I mean, case in point, last year, those were not the 4 best teams. I don't care what you say. I don't care what argument you have. Those were not the 4 best teams, because there was a 5th best team that actually, and a 6th, I would argue, with Georgia and Florida State, that got left out of the playoffs. So you knew that they were going to always have to make a modified schedule for the playoffs. And this 5-7, of course, the transfer portal hit the Pac-12 hard. Those people transferred out. And you only got 2 left. It makes total sense. And kudos to the Pac-12 2 teams, the Pac-2, for recognizing that. And so, so the 5 conference champions, highest ranked conference champions, which we'll get into in a second, because it can be confusing how to understand this format.
Yeah.
Plus the 7 at large, it's going to make for a very intriguing and interesting season next season.
Yeah, and I do think you're right about the 16-team playoff. And, for what it's worth, one of the big 2 controlling powers, the Big Ten Conference Commissioner, he's in favor of a 16-team playoff.
Yes.
And so really right now, that's another topic that we're going to cover in this episode, is the Big 12 SEC alliance, or whatever you want to call it. It surely isn't going to work out like the ACC and the Pac-12 and all that alliance. That didn't go anywhere fast. But so let's get into this 5-7 format. First off, let's talk about what it is. So you have the 5 highest ranking conference champions. Now, here's the kicker to this. In their statement when they released this, it said that there is no conference that will qualify automatically, and there will be no limit on the number of participants from a conference. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be the Power 5 champions and
Correct.
the group of 5 champions. It could be, especially in the automatic qualifier bid, you could have a G5 team certainly run up the ranks and end up getting one of those bye weeks with the first 4 teams, 1 through 4, the first 4 seeds will get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. So that's coveted. You want to get a hold of that bye.
Right.
But there's a few other fun things that we're going to talk about. But as far as that goes, I think the important thing to remember here is that if you win your conference, you have a 99%, not 100 because they just said
Not
there's no
100.
there's no for sure tie-ins. You have a 99% chance of being in the playoff if you're a Power 5
Right.
conference champion. And the perfect example that we were talking about before the show, we were trying to decode this whole thing because it does get confusing quick. Is
Very
when you
quick.
Right. The perfect example here is looking at Liberty last year. Now, when you look at week 15 of the CFP rankings, which was right before Selection Sunday or whatever, a dark day in Tallahassee
Mm,
history, but they were 13-0 and ranked 23rd.
that's
And
right.
so your team right above them was Clemson at 8-4.
That's right.
So, as we talked about, you're going to have to be doing some things to be a
Yep.
G5 team that jumps a Power 5 champion. Now, I think what's important is if you win your conference, you have that 99% chance of getting in. Now, you also have the 7 at-large spots. So, you can still be a high rank. Like if you're playing in your conference championship game as a Power 5 team and you lose, you still have a really good opportunity to get in
Correct.
there because you're going to be one of those higher ranked teams. If you look at Louisville last year, when Louisville lost, they very well could have kind of squeaked in there. I mean, they were right
Yep.
on the outside. They were before then they were right on the outside, so maybe they get left out. But you have that opportunity. If we
Yeah.
talked about this before, if Louisville had upset Florida State in that ACC title game, they would have gotten in, but Florida State probably would have gotten one of those
Yeah.
at-large bids.
I I would assume.
Right. Now, here's where it's going to get a little dicey here. There is no limit to the conference, the amount of conference players that they can have in there. So we all know this is going to be very heavily slated towards the Big Ten and the SEC. They're probably
Right.
going to have a majority of those teams in there. But I think the exciting thing for this is one, you do keep the door open for that Cinderella story. Like you would have had Liberty in there. And just for the sake of knowing, last year, when you look at what it would have looked like in 2023, Florida State would have drawn Liberty in the
Yep.
first
The first
round.
round.
So
Yep.
they would have still had that opportunity. Now, Liberty would have been the only G5 team in there. And,
Correct.
we were talking about this earlier. Even some of the best G5 teams throughout history struggle to get in the top 10. So
That's right.
it's still going to be very heavily slated to the Power 5. And a lot of that has to do with the strength of schedule.
Right.
Now, as much as we say that it's kind of not fair to load this thing with Big Ten and SEC teams, when you look at the current expansion format, the landscape of college football, they got a lot of good teams.
Yep.
Outside of Clemson, Florida State, and Notre Dame on a whim, maybe because they've made the playoffs before, even though they get blown out every time they make it in. There's not a whole lot of top tier programs left that aren't in those two conferences or the 3
Right.
teams that we named. So they have you have a pretty good opportunity and as one of those, they're going to load up and it is what it is. I mean, even when you look at just from a brand marketplace, because, this whole thing's run by TV
Oh, yeah.
nowadays.
Yep.
And, I was doing some research on it the other day. Out of the top 25 most watched teams in 2023, 17 of them are current Big Ten or SEC teams. That's going into
That's right.
2024. So the numbers, the TV numbers are there. 3
That's
of
right.
those out of there were Florida State, Notre Dame, and Clemson. Those were 3 other teams. So, if expansion works like we think it is, and those 3 brands end up somewhere in a conference, and we're going to talk about Notre Dame in a minute, why they're going to end up in a conference, that's going to be big, man, because once they're essentially going to shut out, these other conferences. But
Yeah.
just to run it back, you have your 5 top ranked conference champions, no matter what conference they come from, probably going to be the Power 5 and then a G5. Those teams 1 through 4 get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. Then you have 5 through 12 that will face off in the rest of the playoff teams, and the higher ranked seeds in those games get a home playoff game.
Yeah.
Now, you always want to buy. I mean, let's be honest. It's a guaranteed win. It is what it is. You can call it like it is. But at the same time, I think a home playoff game is pretty freaking cool, man. Like, you imagine having a college football playoff game between, like, say, Florida State and Michigan, or Florida State and Alabama, or something like that inside
Yep.
Doak in late
Oh, man.
December. That's going to be awesome.
That's gonna be crazy. Now, think about this. This is the thought that I keep thinking about. Okay, let's just start with the 5, highest ranked conference champion. Okay, so basically, the way I'm understanding this format is that at the end of the season, and we'll get into the whole strength of schedule thing in a little bit, but at the end of the season, it honestly doesn't matter where you're ranked
Nope.
in some ways, because
Unless
if
you're an
you
at-large bid.
unless you're an at-large bid. But if you are a conference champion, okay, and you're ranked in the top 25 of the college football invitation top 25, okay, then you are in line for one of the top 5 spots, okay?
Yep.
If we went off of this year, okay, let's just say this. You literally could have a Liberty, let's say Florida State wasn't 5th. Let's just run that scenario. Okay. Let's say Florida State was higher and Liberty was the conference champion. They were the lowest of the top 5 conference champions. So they got the 5th seed. You could almost have a scenario where Liberty is hosting a playoff game at their location with like a Penn State or Ohio State or Ole Miss or Oregon or Missouri, or even if Georgia's having a down year and they make the top 12, where Georgia goes to Liberty to play a game because Liberty is a top 5 conference champion and they are awarded one of those top 5 slots.
And they would have probably jumped 10 spots to get there. That's what's crazy. Spots.
They could be ranked 23rd or 20th. Let's say they're 20th, but because they are the 5th highest ranked conference champion, they will then get that 5th spot in the playoff. That is wild to me.
It is wild. And they always put a lot into winning your conference, and that's always been a big aspect of everything.
It's always been in. Yep.
Until last year. Until last year. Thanks, old Boo.
Boo.
He might be out, but he's never going to be out of our angry dreams or whatever.
That's right.
But at the same time, I mean, it feels like there's almost too much weight put on winning a conference with this new format, but at the same time, and that's why we think, like, in my opinion, I think you're probably going to go to a 16-team playoff, and you may not play a conference championship game anymore. You may not. You may just go to the highest seeded one. But it is crazy, and you're going to have some people who are going to get their feelings hurt a little bit when maybe they're on the bubble. Say that team that you're talking about jumped from 20 up to 5, and you're number 12. Now you're number 13. Down.
Exactly.
You're going to be mad. So that's the other thing.
What's crazy about
there could still be drama. You know what I mean? There could still be some drama.
There is going to be drama. So if you're in that, if you're in that, I'm going to say 11, 12, 13. If you're between 11 and 15, okay, if you're somewhere in that range, as the season is winding down, as we're getting close to Selection Sunday, man, you are sweating all kinds of things, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because one, if you're 13 to 15, you're trying as hard. You're hoping everybody loses. You're hoping all that. But if you're 11 and 12, you're hoping that there is no conference champion ranked below you. Like, you're just hoping, because if they do, everything slots right down after that. Like, wow.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing, is like, it will fix to a degree what happened last year with Florida State, a Power 5 conference champion being left out.
Right.
But you're still going to have drama again at 10, 11, 12, where someone's going to feel like they got screwed and someone's going to feel like they got gifted in. And so what really makes this interesting is, so you have your 5 conference champions. It doesn't matter, if it's SEC, Big Ten, G5, or whoever from what conference that comes from, ACC, Big 12, ACC, you still have those 5 in. So then the next 7 slots, you're competing as the highest ranked at-large bid. Now, see, this is where it gets confusing for a team like Notre Dame, and this is why it's an interesting subject to bring up with them. So this is also one of the main reasons I think Notre Dame's days as an independent are numbered.
Coming to an end.
So you could end up, let's just say Notre Dame has a great year and they end up number 1 in the final CFP rankings before Selection Saturday or Selection Sunday. They would get dropped
according to the rules.
Right. They would get dropped to the 6th seed. Yep. Because the 5 would jump above them because they would jump to 5 because the 1 through 4 guaranteed the top 4 slots or whatever. So, but either way, they would not be number 1. They would not get a bye. Yeah. And so in theory, Notre Dame can never have a bye in the playoffs. They can't, because they can never be a conference champion. Hence why I think they're going to join a conference. And also, if, side note, when these 2 power conferences, the two superpower conferences in the Big Ten and
Right.
the SEC, if they keep expanding, and now they have all the teams that Notre Dame traditionally plays, they might just tell them, look, you're either going to join the conference or you're not going to have a schedule. And
Exactly.
without that strength of schedule, you're not going to make it in because you have to be up there. And, we talked about earlier where when you looked at week 15 of the college football playoff rankings and looked at where Notre Dame was, I mean, they were 9-3 and they were outside. They were at number 16. So they would have to win 10 to 11 games.
Oh,
So I
yes.
think
Yes.
they're going to have to join a conference to have that opportunity. Now, the benefit to Notre Dame on the flip side is you don't have to take the risk of playing a conference championship game, and
Nope.
you still have 7 at-large bids to fight for.
Yep.
But, you would like to think that a lot of the teams that are in a conference championship game that maybe don't win, they're going to be pretty close to fighting for that as well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so like, where does the weight come in? Now, I think this also brings up something that we can kind of talk about now is strength of schedule. So if you know that you want to be the highest ranked conference champion, so basically if you go undefeated and you win your conference, you're going to be you're in. You're pretty much in there. You almost have no benefit now if you're a
Yep.
Power 5 team in scheduling these hard out of conference games like these ones we have coming up with Alabama or with Georgia and these ones that are coming up. You almost get no benefit because you can
Right.
still lock in that conference title game. Now, at the same time, if you were to win that game and you were at an at-large position, that's going to help you if you win, but it's going to hurt you if you lose.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side of that, with the G5, you got to take some risk because
Yeah.
you need to get your butt into the top 12,
And
and you're going to have to beat some good teams to do it. That's why you saw a team like Liberty at 13-0 ranked below, I'm looking at the rankings now, but below four-loss Power 5 teams. So you're going to have to take those risks. Whereas the Power 5 teams, I think you're going to de-risk your schedule a little bit because you almost get no benefit from playing those hard games unless you're just really trying to go for that at-large bid.
right. Yeah. I mean, in some ways I see what you're saying, and so, in other ways I'm a little differ on that. And then here's why: because if you're a G5 school, you're gonna take you need to take some risk to get into the top 25. It
Right.
it doesn't matter if you well, let me say it this way. You need to take some risk to get into the top 25 rankings, and then you have to go undefeated and win your conference, or at least one game loss and win your conference. If you win your conference with one loss and you're in the top 25, as long as you're the highest ranked G5 team, you're likely in the top 5 seeds of the playoff, right? I mean,
Right.
that's really it. So you don't have to like go for broke and play like a super, super hard non-conference schedule. You just need that one win against a Power 5 opponent that is recognizable enough to get you into the top 25. And then you need to win your conference title. If you do that based on the 5-7 format, and you're the highest ranked G5 team, there are only 4 other Power 5 conference champions, right? There's
Right.
the SEC, Big 10, ACC, Pac-12. That is it. You just got to be the best of the G5. And if you're the highest ranking of them, then even if you have one loss, but you're ranked in the top 25 and you're the highest of the G5, you're going to be in one of those 5 slots, the 5th slot, most likely.
Oh, you'll be in. I think my point was more unless you are basically guaranteeing your way in by winning the conference. If you're going to
Right.
try and get an
Oh, if
at-large slot,
yeah, the at
it's
large.
never
Yes.
it's never going to happen unless
Yes,
you
you're
win the
right.
conference. So you
You're
basically
right.
have to win that. But no, I mean, you make a good point. But I think it's also like I said, when you look at some of the schedules, and this is why strength of schedule is so going to be so important.
Right.
When you just look at the teams, we were talking about it before in the final selection Saturday, 11 out of 12 teams were current Big Ten or
That's
SEC
right.
teams. Florida State was the only outlier that is not going to be in one of those conferences in 2024. Now, I do want to make a point for this because I don't know if I said it earlier in the episode. This is only 24 and 25.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
then
It's a
it will
2-year deal.
right, it will be reformatted in 26. That could be where they bring in back the 6 to 6 and they have 6 plus 6 and they include the Pac-12 if they figured themselves out,
Right.
or it could go to that 16 team playoff.
Yep.
Now, again, when you talk about how they're going to handle the Big Ten and the SEC issue where they formed this alliance, and we know that it's kind of been rumored a little bit that they're expected to ask for guaranteed playoff spots. They want a bigger cut of the money. It sounds terrible, man. It really does. It sounds like you could basically just break those two conferences off and have their own playoff. And I think that in a sense, you almost have to bend your knee to them a little bit because
Yeah.
they could very well do that, and they could take basically every top brand and leave. And if they snap up Florida State, Clemson, and Notre Dame, then it's lights out. I mean, you
Yeah.
could basically have the whole playoff out of those two conferences. But again, that's what we were talking about. Like as much as it pains me to say it, the 2024 version of those two conferences, they have 90% of the best teams in college football as
Right.
it stands right now. So it's not far fetched to think they deserve those, but the guaranteed slots, I think, is where you get a little bit of a problem. Now, I think again, you're going to put Notre Dame in a pickle, and so they're going to probably end up joining somewhere. And then Florida State, we know, is talking about getting out already. So it just depends on where they end up. And I think this is also somewhere where this puts more emphasis on Florida State getting out of the ACC because one, you could be losing money by those two conferences taking up the large sharehold of the payout, but you may also have like two chances to get in. To be honest, because when they start comparing strength of schedule, you could have say a 10-2 Missouri team or something like that from the SEC that had to go through that SEC gauntlet or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and you're sitting there as an 11-1 ACC team that maybe just lost in the conference champion against a team that is now in the playoffs. You might get left out for a
Yeah.
team that has more losses than you based on strength of schedule because again, this is still dependent on the CFP committee rankings.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense. You may not like it because I didn't like it at first when I was reading the news about how the SEC and the Big Ten wanted guaranteed slots. But it makes sense why they would want that. And they're only doing their job. I'm not saying they should be afforded that. I'm not saying that that's the way it goes, but it makes sense why they want that. Because Kate, just as you said, the SEC and somewhat the Big Ten, they're going to play a more difficult schedule than
Right.
the ACC, than the Big 12, than any other conference, right? Because the SEC, it's already been reported that they're basically going to be moving to a 9-conference game schedule, which means there's only going to be 3 out of conference, non-conference games that they're going to schedule. So in theory, and again, Florida State's eventually going to be out of this conference, whatever. So I'm not picking on Florida State. What I'm just
Right.
saying is you could literally be an 11-1 or 12-0, 13-0 ACC champion going forward and not have played the same type of schedule unless your non-conference was filled with SEC or Big Ten teams, which would be ridiculous. Because why would
Right.
you do that? Because basically the way the format's set up right now is you just win, you win the ACC and you're in one of those 5 slots somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And so if you win the ACC, you could literally have 3 losses on your plate, and you're going to be in one of those. You're not going to be the top slot, but you'll definitely be in one of those slots
There's
there.
5, yeah.
And so you're in. So why play a difficult schedule? Why play it all? This model is basically rendering a strength of schedule argument outside of at-large teams obsolete. If you
Right.
win your conference champion, it doesn't matter the schedule you play, right?
Right.
It only matters if you are a group of 5 conference champion, right? Because where you're ranked. But as long as you're the highest group of 5, then you're good. And then it doesn't matter if you're a power 5, because as long as you're in that top 25 ranking, you're going to be more likely going to be ranked higher, even at 3 losses, than a group of 5 champion sometimes. So you're going to be in the slot. So in my mind, it almost diminishes strength of schedule outside of at large. Now, when it comes to the
Right.
7 at large slots, then yes, strength of schedule comes into play. But for those top 5 slots, it doesn't matter what you play. So
Right.
it really diminishes that.
Right, and I think that's a great point. Now, I kind of thought a few different things while you were saying that. It kind of dawned on me just now. So it's like, okay, if you were to go 9-0 in the ACC and say you played 3 Big Ten or SEC teams outside of that, and you lost every one, you're still in the
Mhm.
playoffs.
You're
That's
still
what
in the
your point is.
playoffs.
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't
I
matter.
think you could also get rewarded if you were to kind of like give yourself a little bit of buffer area there, where if you're like, okay, what if we don't win the conference championship?
Yep.
Then you're going to need those good wins. And
That's
I
true.
think like if you were to be able to put a feather cap, like we play Alabama 25-26, if you could put that feather in your cap and say, well, we beat Alabama, And
Right.
that's an SEC team that's going to be on the fringe of being in every single year. That's going to make your resume look better. So
Right.
you could get by with scheduling those teams. I just don't think, like, if you feel like you're the best team in the ACC or whatever conference you're in, then you don't necessarily need it.
No, you don't.
Right. And so it's just, but like, back to those teams. And again, we think Florida State's going to be out of the ACC probably by 25, just the way things are going. Again, it just comes back to knowing the reality, and I feel bad saying this because we kind of died on this hill last year with the strength of schedule, and Florida State did beat
Did.
LSU, and they did
That's
beat
right.
Florida, on the road with a backup. And they did all those things. But again, it comes back to, and this is also considering the 2024 version of those conferences.
Right.
When you
That's
add the
right.
Texas and Oklahoma, and you add the Oregon and the Washington into the pack, or into the Big Ten, and like we were talking about before the show, it's like when you just talk about the difficulty of navigating that versus navigating the ACC. I mean, let's call it what
Right.
it is. This is why we're trying to get the heck out of this conference.
Right. Right.
And before Miami fans chime in, you're part of the reason that the strength of schedule
Thank
sucks.
you.
But it's like the joke that I made earlier. It's like, what would be harder to fight 15-year-olds or 6-year-olds? You know what I'm saying? Like, if we're battling some 6-year-olds, like I'm powing and we're in the playoffs.
Yeah. We're in the playoff.
15-year-olds, I'm probably in trouble.
We're going to the hospital later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to the hospital with a couple black eyes there. But I think that, I mean, it is important to have a good strength of schedule for the at-large portion. But like you said, I mean, if you're in one of the conferences that can get that automatic qualifier bid, you don't necessarily
That's right.
need that because look
That's
at
right.
Florida State last year. They could have lost to LSU. They could have lost to Florida, and they still would have been in
Still
the
got
playoffs.
in.
They
Yep.
still would have been in the playoffs. So it's a little confusing to get used to this new format, but I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. I think 12 is kind of a weird number of teams. I don't know that I love 4 buys, but at the same time, I think that the reason I don't hate the buys is because I think you need to have some kind of reward
You need to be
for
rewarded.
being
Yes.
good, because
Yes.
essentially, if you were, say, like the number 1 team in the country and you had a conference championship game the last week, even if you lose and that's a ranked team like Michigan, Ohio State or something last year, say that was a conference title game, you could sit your starters and you're
Yep.
still going to be in the top 12. So I think
That's
it
right.
gives you that little bit of reward
Yeah.
for trying to be better throughout the course of the season and finish as one of those top 4 teams, because you want that bye. Now, I think the first edition of the playoffs games, the first round, are going to be around December the 20th, and
Yep.
then all the subsequent games after that, after the home games are knocked out, are going to be your New Year's Six bowls.
Correct.
And so those will happen still. I think it's 1 on New Year's Eve and 3 on New Year's Day is the way it's going to be. But man, I still think, like, when you talk about rest versus rust, and you look at the what would you rather have? Would you rather have that extra week to prepare and end up being like 3 weeks off?
That's
Or
right.
would you want that home playoff game? And now I think
Right.
you always take the automatic win, but a home playoff game is a game changer. And
Oof,
I think that's
man.
fun. I think
College
that's
football with a home playoff game atmosphere. Oh my
it's
gosh.
exciting. And I think you also open the door to some other cool things. Like, it may not be fun for us coming from Florida, but everyone says, like, we're talking about going to the Big Ten. And if you're talking about, okay, well, it's cold, and everybody says, well, it's not that cold till later in the year. Well, that's going to be a playoff game potentially
Yeah,
at
that's right.
Michigan, at Penn State. And you
At
could be
Ohio
talking,
State. Whew.
right. And you could be talking about playing that in late December. It could be
Yeah.
pretty darn cold. So there
Oh
could be some
man.
advantages there that could just be fun. But overall, I think it's good for the sport. I think obviously the 4-team playoff had some flaws. And when you just look at how many blowouts that they had in
Yeah.
that format, it just really didn't work. It was,
No.
maybe better than a 2-team with the BCS format. I think maybe they should have let the BCS pick the 4 teams. Hey, neither here nor there on that. But I think this is a cool format, and I think it will get to
Yeah.
16 teams. But overall, I mean, I like the idea of having the ability to go out, win your conference, get rewarded for it, get that automatic
Yes.
kind of qualifier bid. Of course, you got to be high ranked because there's no
That's right.
guarantee. We
Right.
were talking about earlier, like, you could literally have a absolute disaster scenario. Now, this is
This
almost
is like
never this is never going to happen. This is 2007 reincarnated.
all
If you
over
remember,
again.
right, if you remember that season, I think Kansas was like number 2 at some
Oh
point.
gosh.
Um, but say you
Kansas
were to
and
have,
Missouri were
right,
1
like,
and 2.
exactly, and say you were to have, like, the ACC champion finish 6-6. I don't know, it's hard to say. And then the Big 12 champion finished like 6-6 or something like that. You could theoretically have like a Atlantic team and a Sun Belt team snag 2 of those spots, and then one
And an
of those
American
power,
team.
Right, and
Yeah.
then one of those teams might get left out. Those Power 5 teams could
That's right.
possibly be stuck fighting for that at-large bid. So I think, again, like I said, I think you have the ability to almost lock in a playoff spot by winning your conference. I like that. So you
Yep.
don't have the situation that happened last year. You also get that little bit of Cinderella story there with like a team like Liberty. I mean, let's be honest, they're probably gonna get their teeth kicked in when they get into the playoffs. It
Yeah.
is what it is. But I like the ability. You see it happen in college basketball all the time. It's the greatest story in sports
That's
when you
right.
see a 16 seed upset a one or something like that. So I think it does leave some excitement on the table there. Unfortunately, it's probably going to be mostly Big Ten and SEC teams, but that could work for our
Yep.
advantage in the next few years because as it looks right now, we're on our way to the door, and we may have a couple of options. And I'm gonna kick it to you and let you talk about that a little bit. But it seems like this thing is getting rolling, and we may
It
have more than one door to explore. Now, with ESPN getting involved in this lawsuit, one of those two options is getting a little bit hard to
yeah.
see.
Yeah.
But I still think at the end of the day, we're going to be out of here sooner than later.
That's right. Well, before we jump to that, because and this will connect to the FSU's conference update. But think about this. Now, what this would automatically make someone assume is that, oh, well, then this in a lot of ways nullifies the impact that the conference football invitational committee has on this. You would be absolutely wrong. And here's why. Because yes, the the 5-7 format is the 5 highest ranked conference champions, right? Now, again, it is in the eye of the beholder, and the beholder is the committee who will determine where each conference champion is ranked in their top 25 ranking, right? So
Yep.
you better be like you can't be naive to think that the SEC and the Big Ten aren't going to be influential and sending basically lobbyists to those committees to basically say, well, you've got to rank the SEC or the Big Ten higher in the conference champion pecking order. Let's say your top 5 conference champions all have 2 losses. Let's say all of them all have 2 losses. There's no undefeated team one year, and they all have 2 losses, whatever. You better be you darn sure better know that the SEC and the Big Ten are going to be lobbying, however they do it secretly, because there's not supposed to be any legal lobbying, but however they do it secretly for the committee to make sure that their conference champion is ranked in one of those top 3 or 4 spots. That's going to happen. And so the committee is still going to have a great influence on this playoff, and especially even more so now with the at-large bids,
Yep.
which is why it is incredibly important for FSU to get the heck out of the ACC. And
Right.
if you've been following along, go ahead.
Well, I will say one thing too is like the good thing about the ACC and with the expansion, the other two conferences are everybody's kind of doing away with the divisions.
Right.
But like if you think about back to when you had the Coastal,
Yeah.
Florida State so in so many years could have been the second best team in the ACC and been locked out
Right.
of that conference title game because they played the same division as Clemson, who was out there
That's
winning
right.
national championships. So without the divisions, I think it is eminently better to help
Yes.
your chances to get in. But like
Yes.
you said, I mean, I think with the lobbying and with looking again, cut back to what I said earlier. 11 out of 12, the top 12 teams last year on selection Saturday, Sunday, or whatever it was, were other than Florida State, they were all out of 2 conferences as of 2024.
That's right.
So you just have to figure that you are battling for one of the at-large spots with a lot deeper pool of competition that
That's
could
right.
be ranked above you as would it shock me to see a 9-3 SEC team or Big Ten team make it in over like an 11-1 ACC team or Big 12
No,
team? Not in the least bit.
not in the
So
least bit.
right. So I do think you're still going to have that little bit of influence. I still think that's why you still need style points. You still need to
Yep.
win against good competition. It's just I think it opens the door for you to bypass the committee by
Yes.
winning your conference because
Yes.
they can put you 1 through 4. You're
But
still
they
getting
gotta
that
put you
bye.
in.
Right.
Right,
You're
right.
still in and you're still getting that bye. But I think if you don't win your conference and you get to the at large
You're
section,
at the mercy.
you are at the mercy, and it's going to be a lot of strength of schedule and what the other teams did. And you're
Yeah.
going to like I don't think we'll ever be as mad as we were as an undefeated
Oof.
Power 5 champion getting left out. But it's still going to make your blood boil if you say
Yeah.
you're 11-1, 10-2, and a 9-3 or 8-4 SEC team or whatever just kind of
It's
jumps you
over
right
you.
there at the last minute. It's going to
Yeah.
piss you off still. So,
Yes, it
um,
is. And
but
that's why it's important.
right. I do like the fact that there are 12 chances now. So
Yeah,
whereas you can have a really good season and at the same time, where we argued that Florida State what they could do last year, but they never got the
right.
opportunity.
That's right.
Now they would have gotten the opportunity. And so
That's right.
that's why I do like the new format because then at least then you can kind of go prove it. You can go earn it.
That's
If you
right.
still think
That's
you were
right.
one of those better teams, you can go prove it.
You can go prove it, and this is why it makes a world of deal for Florida State to get out of the ACC because they can prove it. They know they can play with the big boys. They've always played with the big boys. I mean, everyone used to say way back when you and I were kids that that Florida State played like an SEC team, anyways, right? And so it makes it even that much more imperative that they get out of the ACC. Now, if you've been following along with just all the Twitter sphere or X or whatever you want to call it, and all the happenings there, you know that Florida State and the ACC are locked into a legal battle dispute about what is an actual penalty, what is an actual withdrawal fee, and if the the grant of rights, GOR, the GOR, if that's even enforceable, an enforceable document. Well, the latest updates that we have is that both the ACC and FSU have filed legal briefings back and forth in both states, North Carolina and here in Florida, arguing all the different things, which you can go on, social media and find all the legal arguments there. But a couple of things that are real interesting right now is number one, ESPN has finally entered the chat.
Yeah. Yeah,
Basically,
exactly.
right? After accusation about this secret deal that the ACC, got with ESPN, and the ESPN has not read up the deal and all the hagglings. Finally, the ESPN has submitted a legal brief in North Carolina and in the state of Florida on behalf of the ACC, arguing that Florida State should not be, basically the biggest thing is that they're arguing is that the documents, the TV agreement between the ACC and the ESPN should not be revealed, that those should be kept and sealed. And they allege, Jesse, that Florida State committed a felony by
That's
releasing
crazy.
the documents, which in the state of Florida, okay. Now I've read this, and we don't claim to be legal experts. So, but I just read this, so I'm literally repeating what a legal expert said. In the state of Florida, Florida State University, as a public university, is required. Jesse, required. You know how to spell
Yep.
that word, right? You know what it means, right? It means that you're forced. Florida
You
State
have
is
to. Yep.
required to
By law.
release by law those documents. And
Yep.
the ESPN is trying to argue that no, in the state of Florida, that's not legal. They are required by law. It's in the law that they're required to release those documents. So to claim that Florida State is committing a felony is asinine. It's just ridiculous. The
Right.
other update, the bigger update, the one that we should all be paying attention to, is that in the ACC's latest filings, and I'm not going to word it correctly, so I'm just going to sum it up basically Michael speak, is the ACC basically made a statement that indicates very clearly that they are ready to go to the negotiating table.
Yep.
They are recognizing, my assumption is that if this goes to trial, and if it goes to trial, it's going to extend way beyond 2025. If this goes to trial, there's a chance they could lose this because the GOR is not the grant of rights, which we've argued, which as fans, we've been arguing this forever.
Right.
Is this really an enforceable document? Is the penalty $500 million? That's the minimum. 500, is that an actual withdrawal fee? Does that actually what it would cost damage wise if Florida State were to lead the ACC? No legal expert on either
Right.
side believes that to be true. The ACC is starting to finally come around to this idea of like, ooh. And so they wrote in the filing that if Florida State wanted to get their media rights back, they could buy them back. That's
Yep.
basically what's the term. That is legal speak for we would like to meet you at the negotiating table. Now,
Right. I'm a
when it
like the thing where they do like I'm gonna write a number on a piece of paper and I'm gonna
and
slide it over to you
slide it
and
over
let's
to
see
you.
how it works. Which is funny because, the whole premise of the ESPN's argument, it's like the Florida State went at the little brother and they're like, "Hey, hey, hey, I need some help over here. Come on, bail
Right.
me out." And they're talking about all these trade secrets that Florida State supposedly, by making these documents public, are releasing trade secrets. The hell kind of trade secrets are we leaking here? You got the worst, like you basically got called a non-Power 5 conference by the committee last year, and
Exactly.
like what are you leaking? Now I understand there's some details in there, but at the same time, it's like I don't see this being some kind of magic wizardry of trade secrets where they're doing some things. I think it's these trade secrets are the ineptness of Swafford and Company back in the day, and they don't want
Oh,
to
they're
get that.
damning.
They
They are
don't want that brought
damning.
to light.
Yes.
So yeah, your
Yes.
trade secrets are more like dark trade secrets.
Correct. And ESPN probably doesn't want, I mean, in some ways I still think ESPN wants the demise of the ACC to happen because it would free them up more money to give to the SEC.
Right.
And so I do think that. But ESPN probably also doesn't want those things to come out because it kind of shows, it gives Florida State and anybody else who wants to leave that much more leverage over ESPN. Like Florida State would have leverage if those trade secrets come out to show the ineptitude and the basically done, and what I forget what the phrasing is when you do business not in like in good
Right. Not in
whatever
good
that
faith or
phrasing.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, not good faith, right? I really think that's some of what the ESPN is like. Well, we don't necessarily want that to come out, right?
Right. Right.
Um, Now the ACC doesn't want it to come out because it would show the ineptitude, like you said, of how terrible they were at managing this whole TV thing way back when. I remember when I was a junior in high school, we were playing NC State one night, and I remember they were commentating about how the ACC was going to get this great network and it was going to help us to grow and be this power conference. And I'm thinking, oh man, okay, let's go. And it took years before
Yeah.
that even materialized. When the SEC and Texas had its own network before anybody else did.
I
Like
know. Yeah.
that shows you the ineptitude of the ACC. And so that is all coming. Now, here's the other thing too, and I'll throw it back to you, is this. We've been speculating that there's no way that Florida State would do this, would pursue this, this trying to get out of the ACC and break the grant of rights if they didn't have some form of a guarantee from another conference, whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten, that they have a spot for them. Now, as you know, the Big Ten and the SEC, they can't write something down. They
Right.
can't, slide a note because that would be tampering and they would be in all kinds of trouble for that legally, right? But you better believe it that we've been reading, and this is sources out on the internet that I trust. They're basically saying that Florida State has a seat waiting for them in the Big Ten, like
Yep.
guaranteed. It's them and North Carolina that's basically been given a blanket, like, hey, you get out of that, you are here. You're welcome here. And so Florida State takes that, puts that in their back pocket, and they pursue this thing. Now, Jesse, and I'd love your thoughts on this, is what does that do for ESPN? You think ESPN really wants a Big Ten flag in their already dominated regional sports? The Big Ten is already basically a national conference. They have more
Yep.
influence in the sense of college football as a whole because of having schools out in the West Coast and having basically most of the East taken care of. And now you're saying they're going to get a flag in the hotbed of Southern football? Man,
Right.
I don't know if ESPN or the SEC would want that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing because you immediately go, well, are they really going to join a conference in the SEC that they're in a legal battle with now? So the SEC doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but there has been a few rumblings that the SEC might be willing to bid a little
Right.
bit for Florida State because again, at the end of the day, this is a profit thing and
Right.
TV controls everything. And I listened to a podcast by some friends of mine, the Ohio podcast, and they're an Ohio State podcast, and they did a good video where they talked about some of the stuff, and it was like, because I don't know a whole lot about the Big Ten, so
Right.
I was listening to some of the things that they said, and they had mentioned how their conference commissioner, they do kind of like to keep the rivalries intact. That's why they went after USC and UCLA, Oregon
Yeah.
and Washington, because they were able to get top brands. And this is why I think you could see Miami kind of get little brothered into the Big Ten to bring them along with Florida State, because then you almost have control of the state of Florida. Now, of course, you have
That's right.
Gainesville right in the middle, but at the same time, you would have a really big footprint. And then at that point, you're stretching, like you said, it's a national conference. You're going from the West Coast to the East Coast, from the North all the way to the Southern tip.
That's
And
right.
so you are going to cover the entire
Whew.
United States. And to me, one, you're getting into one of the most populated states in the country with the most TV
That's right.
sets and the most eyeballs on the TV sets.
That's right.
So to me, I think, again, people talk about whether Florida State is wanted or not. Look, again, when I talked about the top 25 most watched teams in college football last year, Florida State was one of those top 25 teams that
That's
was
right.
not in the SEC or the Big Ten. It was them and Notre Dame and Clemson. And then, of course, Colorado was there one year, but, everybody was
Yeah.
blowing up Dion, and that'll probably fade off. But again, it's just the media value of Florida State that's going to
That's
get
right.
them a seat at the table. Now,
That's right.
what's funny is like the same kind of handshake, under the trees or whatever they said in the statement, deal that might get Florida State out of the ACC is the same kind of deal that might get us into the Big Ten, because we had
Right.
kind of that secret handshake deal. But
That's right.
again, yeah, I don't believe they would have bitten off this big of a
No.
deal without a landing spot.
That's
And
right.
yeah, I think you're right. I think it's just going to come back to negotiating on a number where the penalty will get thrown out the window, and they will end up just saying, what's your price you want to buy your
Oh,
media
yeah.
rights back
Yeah.
for. And then I think it's going to be the Big Ten. Now, I think if you can get an offer from the SEC, even back channel, it's good for you because you can then play that off of one another, and you
Correct.
can kind of drive your price up. You obviously the Big 12 is not an option, and
Right.
staying in the ACC would be your only other option. But again, that's obviously untenable
Yeah.
because of what they're doing. And
Right.
even if they reach a big number, some of the reports that the Project Osceola that they put out,
Yeah, I saw
are
that.
heavily, heavily redacted. So there's
Whew.
not much you can take out of it. But from what I read, some of these private equity partners that they've been reaching out to, they could fund the money. They could
Oh,
get
yeah.
you there. There's a portion in there that's for leaving the ACC. And, it may mean things like you're going to put a name on the Tucker Center. That should have
Yep.
happened a long time ago.
Long time ago.
Right. You might see, Doak Campbell Stadium might be whatever, like whatever name brand goes.
Seminole. So the speculation right now is, and this is credible sources. So I'm not saying that it's true. I'm just saying the people who've said this, I trust a lot. That basically they're negotiating with the Seminole tribe for potentially the Seminole tribe using Seminole Hard Rock Stadium, Bobby Bowden Field. Like that could be a thing where
Right.
they're making between $1 to $5 million on naming Doak Campbell Stadium.
Right. It's a lot. And when you look at the numbers, it's a lot. When I saw something like the Tucker Center, they estimated was, I think, something like 800,000 to a million or whatever. I was like, why didn't we do that 10 years ago? Who,
Exactly.
you know what I mean? Like, no disrespect to Donald L. Tucker or whatever, but, put a name on there, get paid for it. And you've seen that trend going around with some of the
Yep.
other stadiums around the country. And I think as
Yep.
long as you can generate that revenue to help you get out, again, the conference payouts, especially, again, tying this back into the 5-7 model, if you're looking at an unequal revenue share for the playoffs, if you're looking for all these things, it's just another feather in the cap of
Yep.
why you need to get the heck out of the ACC and get to one
Absolutely.
of these. Because again, if they do anything to upset the apple cart with those two conferences, there's literally nothing stopping them from going, okay, we already have everybody. We're going to
Yep.
maybe snap up one of their two of these other programs like Notre Dame or whatever, and then we're going to go play in our own sandbox. We don't need you anymore.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that puts the emphasis on why Florida State needs to get out. I think it's coming sooner than later.
Yes, sir.
And I think a lot of what you said was true, where it's like, if you know ahead of time, if you have a good inkling that Florida State's going to find their way out, and if one finds their way out, Clemson's not going to stay, whether or
Right.
not anybody else leaves the ACC, and I'm sure at least North Carolina is probably going to make it out
Yep.
of there too, is ESPN even going to pick up that extension? So
No.
the ACC could be like the AAC,
Yes.
or the same way the Big East went by way of now they're a basketball conference. So like it
Yep.
could very well happen. And yeah, man, I think it's going to happen sooner than later, because I think they know that no matter what the ACC does as far as unequal revenue sharing, performance based, it's rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
not going to do you any good. You have to get out of here
Absolutely.
for the long term picture of the way the sport is headed. And
Absolutely.
with the new alliance between those two conferences, you can see what's coming. You
Yep.
can see it coming. And so, yeah, man, that's pretty interesting. I think it's going to happen hopefully sooner than later. I think that, I still think the August 15th date is still like a thing where they have to name whether they want to
Yep.
be out that year. I'm for sure they're going to, they're probably going to play in the ACC in 24, but I think 25, you're going to be looking at some things,
Yeah.
maybe a Big Ten schedule or whatnot, but I think
Yeah.
it's obviously better for you in the long term.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think they'll definitely obviously play the 24 ACC schedule. Where we need to really keep our eye on is that 25, 26 range. I think
Yep.
that's where I've heard or I've seen, sorry, let me just say that because I don't have sources. I read a lot of sources.
Yeah.
I've read where 26 seems to be like the cutoff. Like they want to be out
Yeah.
of the ACC by 2026. So
Yeah. Yeah. I always say, like, I got sauces, but I ain't got
yeah, I got
sauce.
sauces, but I got no sources.
But no, I agree, man. And also keep in mind, 26 is when they're gonna reformat the playoffs again,
That's
and
right.
so
That's right.
you could see like maybe they don't guarantee those playoff spots now, but in 2026 they're like, okay, let's go to a 16 team playoff, and
That's
these
right.
two conferences are guaranteed 10 spots or something like that, and
That's
you
right.
just want to put yourself in the best place to be in the conversation at the end of the year. So that, guys, is pretty much going to do it for us in this episode. We just wanted to kind of get out here and talk about this new 5+7 format. I think it's exciting for the game.
Yes.
I think it's going to make the postseason a lot more exciting. You know, again, you look back to last year where, for better or worse, people just don't care about the New Year's Six Bowls anymore. And I
That's
think
right.
this is going to make it more important. I love the idea of home playoff games. I'm not mad at the idea of an automatic win with a bye if you make it in there.
That's
I
right.
like the
Let's go.
idea of the little bit of Cinderella story too. So I think it's going to be good for the game. I'm
Absolutely.
excited about it, and I just can't wait, man. I think it's going to be a fun season in 2024, and I really hope more than anything else we get to experience it firsthand, whether it be at an at-large team or a conference champion. I just hope we get to find out what the 12-team playoff is like, and we get to be in the first rendition of it. So looking forward to it, and
Well,
hopefully.
Jesse, hold on a second now. Before we stop this conversation about the 5-7 model, just to bring us to a close now, the best number one champion of all apparel wear is Alumni Hall.
And they're not getting left out of the playoffs because they're
That's
a
right.
champion every time you stop by there. So if you go check out Alumni Hall, who we thank for sponsoring this episode, and go load up on some new Seminole gear that you can wear to that home playoff game if you want, go check them out. 1415 Timberlane Road is their new location that is packed full of FSU gear, or you can order online, have it shipped to your door. Either way, you're saving 10% with code SPEAR. So make sure you go check those guys out. Code SPEAR to get 10% off your order. Got some new baseball merch in that I got my eye
Ooh,
on. And
let's
so I'm
go.
thinking about getting one of them Sunday Gold shirts.
Let's
So go
go.
check them out. Thank you guys so much for supporting those that support us. And with that being said, we will wrap it up here. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next one. And as always, go Noles.